Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Wednesday, July 6th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 59 days, the game against Michigan in 143 days. Our season preview series continues today with one of the biggest names in the Big Ten East, the Penn State Nittany Lions. My guest today is Donnie Collins. He has been on the Penn State beat since 2004, writing at the Scranton Times-Tribune. Donnie, first of all, welcome back to the show, and thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Tom.
So, in most of our season preview series, it feels like, okay, we got to start with the quarterbacks or the head coach or whatever, because those are kind of always the big storylines. But for this one, it feels like we kind of have to start with the whiteout, because previously, whenever Ohio State was on the Nittany Lions home schedule, it was always in prime time. It was always the whiteout. It was always one of the biggest games of the season. But then when the Buckeyes were there 2 years ago, there was no crowd, obviously, because of COVID. And now this year, it sure sounds, they haven't officially announced the game time as of the time we're recording this, but it sure sounds like that game is going to be a big noon kickoff because Penn State has already announced that the Minnesota game is the whiteout this year and not the Buckeyes. How is that going over with the program and with the fan base right now?
The fans are a little curious. I'll put it that way. I get what they're doing. They want the whiteout at night. I almost called it the night out, but they want the whiteout at night. They want the fireworks display. Now they want the national attention from ABC, ESPN, whoever's going to carry that game, and they want the visual of it. They understand the significance of the visual of the night out. They did it again, the whiteout. So, yeah, so I get what they're doing, but every year that Ohio State could have been the whiteout opponent over the last decade, it has been Ohio State. So I think the significance of that is not lost also on the fan base, who's now wondering, are they getting sick of losing the whiteout game? Now they won it in 16, but they've played some close whiteout games against Ohio State, and it hasn't worked out again. For them, they've beaten the other teams they've faced. Michigan mainly when they've come in for the whiteout. But yeah, I think they're wondering what, from a marketing standpoint, they gain from having a totally different team, a non-traditional Big Ten power, I would dare say, come in and play that game in front of the national audience. And I think they assume that Penn State believes they could win the game. But there's also some things behind the scenes here. I think that they look at that and say this is almost a perfect opponent. Kirk Shiraka is the Minnesota offensive coordinator now. He was at Penn State 2 seasons ago, kind of unceremoniously dumped after a year. That's going to be an interesting storyline. The 2019 game between these two teams, when Penn State was undefeated, went up to Minneapolis and got beat, and Tanner Morgan had an unbelievable game. I think that's another that kind of rivalry thing, and that's two of the, conceivably at least at this point anyway, two of the more experienced quarterbacks in the country, with Morgan for Minnesota and Sean Clifford coming back for Penn State. But I think they think this could be a really good game. But yeah, and I think they also believe, hey, we're going to sell out the Ohio State game anyway. Why not try to sell out 2 different games ahead of time? So I think there's some business aspects behind it, but the significance of it not being Ohio State, I think, is something Penn State fans wonder if, does this program really approach where it says it wants to be right now? And I think that those are fair questions.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the atmosphere is like and what how much hype there is nationally around the game. If it's the whiteout itself that draws the hype, or if it's the opponent. Last year it was Auburn, if I remember right, and that girl, that was a big interconference game, so it got a lot of hype there. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out nationally in the media, and some of that'll probably depend on how Penn State's doing at that point in the schedule. And preseason, Phil Steele has them 18th in the country. S&P Plus has them 13th in the country. So it's like just about where you'd sort of, in that neighborhood where you sort of expect Penn State to be. But then you look back at over the last couple seasons, and they're 8-10 in the Big Ten over the last 2 years, 4-5 each in 2020 and 2021. And I think you can kind of write off 2020 as a weird COVID thing. But 4-5 again in league play again last fall, lost 5 of their last 7 games. What went wrong for that team at the end of last year?
I think a couple of things, but we could start with injuries. I mean, they're as much as the Iowa fan contingent wants to think otherwise, Penn State's probably going to win the game if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt. And that's also the game P.J. Mustipher, their really good defensive tackle, got hurt in. So they played great defense without Mustafa, but the offense they couldn't gain a yard without Clifford in there. So I think they're going to win that game. And then the next game is 2 weeks later against Illinois, where they rush Clifford back out there because they don't want to go back to the kid that they played in the Iowa game, Roberson. So they brush Clifford back out there. He's a little banged up, according to his own estimation, which means he's probably a lot banged up. And then they lose the Iowa game. So there's 2 games right there they shouldn't have lost. And then your season spirals out of control because Michigan, you lose to Michigan in a really good year for Michigan. You lose to Ohio State, which is what another decently played game, but they don't get over the top. And then the Michigan State game at the end of the year is the other one they lose, where they played okay, but it's just a weird game. And that's happened to Penn State a lot since that Minnesota game in 19. They've just played a lot of games that were, for lack of a better term, weird. That everything seemed to go against them. And it's not an excuse. They've played poorly enough to lose those games. But the 9 overtime game against Illinois is something that I think still sticks in the craw of a lot of Penn State fans. They're much closer to a team that should have winning. That should be a 6-3, 7-2 Big Ten team, but they're not. You're right. They're 4-5 2 consecutive years. The COVID year was very strange. Clifford played terribly. Micah Parsons was that they had built that whole team around Micah Parsons, and he didn't play the season. So they've had some issues the last couple of years. I think they're much better than they've played. But the old saying, you are what your record says you are, and now the pressure builds. They have a roster that talent wise is maybe second best in the conference. They've recruited better than everybody, maybe except Ohio State, but they've been on par. They've been pretty close with Ohio State in the recruiting rankings. So the future is bright, but who knows what the future is anymore? The way college football is, the way players come and go, the transfer portal, NIL, things like that. So yeah, the last few years have kind of led to this pressure-packed 2022 where they may not talent-wise be where they're going to be in the future, but there's a lot of people expecting that if these guys stay healthy this year, if Clifford could stay healthy, if they can keep Mustafa on the field, keep some of those key guys on defense. They didn't have Adisa Isaac, who was going to be one of their star pass rushers for a down last year. So if they can keep this team healthy, I think they believe there's talent there, but they haven't been able to keep the team healthy. And again, the saying is your record is what what they say it is, what the record is. So and your track record is what it is too. And they haven't been able to keep these guys healthy.
Yeah, and anytime stuff goes wrong, everyone always points to the quarterback. And you mentioned Clifford is the first thing, Clifford getting hurt in that Iowa game, and then not being healthy in the greatest game in college football history, that 9 overtime classic. We were covering an Ohio State Indiana game that day in Bloomington, and it was like, all right, we got to get to the stadium 3 hours before the game. And it was like, well, we got to wait till this game's over. And then we got to the stadium about 2 hours before the game because it was like, we can't turn this off. This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Not necessarily a good way, but incredible nonetheless. That was Sean Clifford banged up in that one. He is back this year, presumably healthy for what feels like about his 12th season in state college. They've got 3 other guys on the roster as well, including highly touted true freshman Drew Aller, who some Ohio State fans are very well aware of, out of Medina in Northeast Ohio. Is the starting quarterback for the first game of the season at Purdue the same guy who's starting when Ohio State visits the weekend before Halloween? And if so, who is it?
You're going to get 20 different answers from everybody who covers this team about that question. And I'm going to probably give you the most unique one. And I'm going to say that's the plan. If they want Clifford to play every snap this year. Now, Christian Veilleux played a lot last year. And he played really well against Rutgers, looked every bit like the future. He had like 280 passing yards, ran the ball well, threw for 3 touchdown passes in relief of Clifford. That was another weird game. They happened to win it, but everybody got sick that week. So they had to play a lot of freshman kids, but he came in and played really well. Then they put him in the Outback Bowl in the second half when Clifford got hurt, and he didn't look nearly as great against Arkansas as he did against Rutgers. So there's some questions there. I think they love Drew Aller. Obviously, what's not to love? He's number 1 quarterback in some circles coming out of high school last year. He's got the Patrick Mahomes kind of skill set. The no look passes, the big arm. He can move a little bit. They also got Bo Perbula out of York, Pennsylvania, who's a pretty good Trace McSorley like prospect in his own right. But I think if they had their druthers, they would be really good coming out of the gate. Clifford would have a really nice season, and they could develop those guys an extra year. They're all freshmen, really, the three of them. So I think their hope on the coaching staff, from James Franklin to Mike Yursich to all those guys, is that Clifford goes out there and has a big season. You hear a lot of, oh, he could be the next Kenny Pickett. I don't know if he has a Kenny Pickett skill set. He doesn't he runs the ball well, but not that well. He has a good arm, but I'm not sure it's a first round NFL arm. But Clifford could be a really good player when he's healthy and when he's protected. I think those are more the questions around Clifford than his skills. But he hasn't won. He's lost big games. He's especially since I keep coming back to that Minnesota game in 2019. Penn State has not been a good team since that game. So. And he's been the quarterback. And there's going to be a lot of attention, down in Kentucky where Will Levis. A lot of people are saying Will Levis should be the number one pick in the draft, next year. I don't believe that, but there's a lot of pressure on Clifford with that because Penn State basically chose Clifford over Will Levis. So I think there is some pressure on Cliff. I think he's a guy who's never going to admit it, but I'm interested to see how he stays healthy, how he handles that pressure. And the spotlight is firmly on him. This season goes as he goes, but because there's a lot of talent behind. There's not some talent. There's a lot of talent behind him, but I still don't know if it's ready. I think they want him quarterbacking this team in November in the bowl game. So I think he will, but there's so many X factors. If they start 3-3, then what are we doing here? Let's see what we got. But I think a lot of bringing Clifford back was the original Big Ten schedule, where Ohio State was coming in early October and Michigan was following the next week. I thought, they're bringing Clifford back just to kind of, navigate through that stretch, and then whatever happens. So that might still be the case, but I think in an ideal world, they want Clifford every snap this year.
Well, at the skill positions, they lost a couple pretty big names, Noah Kane, Jahan Dotson. Other than that, though, they have more or less everybody else back. So, of all those skill position guys, if I take Parker Washington as a guy who's the most likely to be the next big star there, and I give you the field, am I going to win that bet?
Are we including running backs?
Yes.
Oh, no, you're going to lose that bet because Nick Singleton, the true freshman, is going to be really, really good. He's Saquon-like. They really, really love him. He's one of those guys. This is the first time since Saquon where I could hear senior defensive players kind of talk about, after one or two practices in the spring, like, oh my God, this guy's got an incredible skill set. So I'll take Singleton, but I'm also at the receiver position. A lot is going to be on Parker Washington because he's got such a great catch radius. He's one of those little guys. He looks like a running back, but he catches everything, runs great routes. But I still like Keandre Lambert-Smith and his potential. He's a much more traditional looking receiver. He's got terrific speed down the field. And they also have Mitchell Tinsley coming in from Western Kentucky this year out of the transfer portal. He was their big portal guy. And he's kind of the quote unquote Dotson replacement. You can't replace Dotson. He was their best player last year by a mile and a half. So they're really going to have to work hard to replace him. And I don't know if Mitchell Tinsley can do that, but I think Tinsley's a good veteran style receiver who can move the chains for them. I think he's one of those guys that can catch the short pass and get you some extra yards too if the spring game is any indication. So they have those three guys at receiver. Their tight ends I think could be tremendous with Theo Johnson and Brenton Strange coming back, and even Tyler Warren had a nice season. But where they're going to struggle at the skill position is who's the fourth guy at receiver if they get an injury. Is Liam Clifford what they think? Is Malik Mega, who got a little bit of playing time last year, going to be okay? He's still got a lot of development ahead of him. But as far as the running back room is concerned, I've had players tell me and assistant coaches that they think that's the most talented room in the whole building this offseason. And it's most of those guys coming back from last year. And the strange thing about that is they finished 118th in rushing last year. So they're going to have to prove that a little bit to me. Kevon Lee's a good player. He's probably gonna be the starter, but I like Singleton. I like Devin Ford a lot. He doesn't get a lot of playing time, but I think Devin Ford is a guy who can come in and surprise some people. But a lot of people are going to be looking at those two freshmen, Singleton and Katron Allen out of the IMG Academy. I think they do have a lot of guys there. So I think it's much more likely that Singleton becomes a star than a national star kind of than any of those receivers do. But they're going to be very interesting at the skill positions this year because they do lose their best player, but they have so much talent coming in that it's going to be, could one of those guys develop in time to make an early impact and kind of put this team on their shoulders the way Barkley did in 15 and 16 as those seasons went on.
Well, you mentioned they were only 118th last year in rushing yards. This is always kind of the elephant in the room with the Penn State offense. It feels like ever since they got just crushed with those scholarship restrictions about a decade ago, they just have never been able to maintain a consistently even above average offensive line for any kind of stretch of time. Last year they gave up 34 sacks. That's double the 17 that Ohio State gave up. And if you go through the years, it's just, it's 28, 29, 30, 34. They're never in that 20 range. It's always in the high 20s for the most part, just year after year after year. So what does the line look like this year? Can they get back to the point where they can run the ball again and protect Clifford or whoever else the quarterback ends up being?
That's the $100 million question with Penn State football, and you're right. It dates back to the Sandusky sanctions that were later lifted, but Bill O'Brien had, when he was the head coach, had this kind of offensive philosophy where they're just going to get rid of the ball quick, and it worked. It was really smart, but it hasn't been it hasn't developed a long-standing offensive line success that they've hoped. They've done what they think they can do. They've brought in some high 4-star, even some 5-star guys. They brought in Phil Troutween, who was one of the top offensive line gurus kind of in college football when he was at Boston College. They've studied it in every different way you can. They've hit the junior college ranks. They've brought in the top Ivy League transfer the last 2 years. Hunter Norzad out of Cornell is in this year. So they've tried to kind of plug holes, and they've tried to develop, and it hasn't led to a cohesive unit. Even last year where they had Rasheed it's Rasheed Walker, not the basketball player Rasheed Wallace, but Rasheed Walker. They thought, oh, here's a guy who could be picked in the top 3 rounds of the draft, and he just played terribly, and he ended up being a 7th round pick, but he wasn't. He was banged up, wasn't a great player. Their center Mike Miranda last year was below average. They just, and that's a veteran guy. So they've not been able to rely on veterans. They haven't seen that development. And I think they're hoping this year that they can get that from the middle on out, where Juice Scruggs was probably their best lineman last year. He played right guard, but he's definitely more of a center. So they moved him to center. He knows the defense. Clifford's been raving about him. He's been able to make the proper calls. They think he's going to make a big difference there. And then you have a kind of a shift in philosophy from what they've done in the past. They're going to start some of those high 4-star, 5-star guys. And Olu Fashanu at left tackle is going to be very interesting to watch. I think he played in the he had one start last year. It was in the Outback Bowl, and he held his own. He was one of the guys who held his own there. But a 5-star guy, Landon Tengwall, played a little bit last year, maintained his redshirt season, and he's gonna get a start. He's gonna get the starting job at left guard, I would think. And then the right guard's going to be Sal Wormley, I would imagine, because he was a guy who everyone thought, he's going to compete. He's going to go in there last year and compete for a starting job, and he got hurt. So I think they like those 3 guys around Scruggs and Caden Wallace at right tackle. But that said, I think they've liked the guys they put in the past, and it hasn't worked out. So it's then you look at it, if the talent in the running back room is what they say it is, and Clifford is mobile and gets rid of the ball quick enough, and he's still getting battered. He was more than 30 sacks last year. It's completely unacceptable for Penn State quarterbacks. And for any team that considers itself a championship contender, whether that's a pipe dream or not, you can't get your quarterback sacked 34 times a season. That's just not going to work. And it happened to McSorley a couple times. and it's now happened to Clifford, who's been the Penn State quarterback now for a quarter of his life. He's just taken a massive beating back there. He's missed games, he's missed time. And it's a guy they have to keep on his feet. So the offensive line better step up. Will they? I need to see that. I need to see what they can do. But I like what they're doing now. I think if you really like Fashanu, if you really like Landon Tangwell, if you really like Wormley, give those guys a shot and then go out and see what those backups could do as backups. Use Norzad as a backup. They have some really good. I like some of the backup guards. Golden Achumba to me is a really good run blocker. I think he could fit in there in certain downs. They like Nick Dawkins, the backup center, but it's one of those deals where they haven't done it, so they're gonna have to prove it.
Yeah, exactly. If you've watched a decade straight of it looking one way, you gotta actually see it. This is the time of year when everyone's feeling good about everything. So let's see it on the field this fall before you officially, yeah, crown it a success. On the other side of the ball, new defensive coordinator Manny Diaz has already outlasted his last day in the Commonwealth State. He has already been the Penn State defensive coordinator longer than he was the Temple head coach. You remember may also remember him as the head coach of Miami until after last season. And then he's new. You got a new look there, and you've got kind of a new look all around that defense. Because if you look at the preseason magazine capsules, they're listed as only having 4 returning starters on defense. Really, there are a lot more than that because you mentioned all the injuries and the guys getting sick. Like lots of these guys have started at least a game or two who are back. You mentioned PJ Mustipher, the defensive lineman earlier. Joey Porter Jr., one of the best corners in the country. But other than those, kind of the big names, who is one of the other newer starters that will be a household name later this year?
I don't even think Joey Porter's the best cornerback in the team. I think Kalen King, he's going to be he's their sophomore cornerback. He's going to be really really good. That's one guy that they talked about last year in spring in 2021 and said this guy's ready to go right now. And they didn't use him because Tariq Castro Fields was healthy last year and embedded there. And he provided a lot of leadership. But when Kalen King played, especially as the season went on, he was an impact guy. I think King is going to be one of those guys who you look at and say, this guy's going to be a household name. If not this year, then next year and the year after. But the guy I think that to me is the best player on the defense this year is going to be Jair Brown, the safety. Another guy they got out of Scranton here and Lackawanna College, like Brisker. Jaquan Brisker was their standout safety last year, and everyone wondered, how good could Jair Brown be? Well, he led the nation in interceptions, and he's just always around the ball. Smart player. His instincts are through the roof. He reminds me of, he's a much better version of Lamont Wade, who played a couple of years ago. And Wade had that really great game against Ohio State where I think he forced 3 fumbles and really kept a Penn State team that had no business in 2019 competing with that Ohio State team in that game. But I think Tig Brown is a guy who can really impact the game from the safety position as a cover guy, as a run stopper. So I think he's the quote unquote household name on this defense this year if things go anywhere near where they did last year. But they're going to be stout up the middle. PJ Mustipher's coming back. But you said they list 4 starters returning. I would say they have 3 starters at defensive tackle who are returning because Mustipher got hurt so early in the season. The guys like Devon Elise and Keziah Izzard had to go in and play, and they did a really good job. I thought as the season went on, as they got more experience, they were pretty good run stoppers. The pass rush piece is going to come for both of them, but I think they have a real shot at being a team that could run out a legit rotation 3 deep on the defensive line. They're going to be very, very good on the defensive line this year. And not a lot of people are talking about that, but they're going to be very good at end. They're going to be very good in the middle. I think the question this year is linebacker because they have to replace Ellis Brooks, who took a shot at the draft and then didn't get picked. Now they're gonna have to replace him with a guy who hasn't played much, Tyler Elsdon or Kobe King, Kalen King's brother. And then Curtis Jacobs is moving from the Sam to the Will, which they think might that's a Manny Diaz move. He thinks that's going to be that's going to put their best playmaker at the linebacker position in a spot to make a lot of plays. But yeah, I think if there's a guy on this defense who's going to really emerge this year and become a guy everyone knows nationally, it's Jair Brown. He's that good.
I am already excited. Ohio State has a true freshman corner, also named Jair Brown. I can't wait to spend the entire fall talking about Penn State safety Jair Brown and going, no, I'm thinking of that. No, that's not his name. No, it must. Nope. Okay, same name. Okay. I will definitely question myself in the middle of sentences several times this fall. So you all have that to look forward to. That'll be great.
Nice.
Something Penn State has to look forward to is a couple really difficult early road games. They play at Purdue on the Thursday night before Labor Day in the Joe Buck Trophy game. And then they play at Auburn in week 3. And then mid-October, they have to play at Michigan. You add in late season home games against Ohio State, Michigan State. Like that is not an easy schedule at all. At least 5 very challenging games. And, you never know if this is the year Rutgers takes another step or, Maryland takes another step or something like that. So looking at this, is this a college football playoff team? Is this a New Year's Six bowl team? Is this a New Year's Day bowl team? Is this something else? Like what is a realistic expectation? Because it sounds like this team is kind of young, and this may be the year before they really take another step. I mean, what's a realistic expectation for this team this year?
I think the realistic expectation is you can get a New Year's Day game. Now, whether that's they went to the Outback Bowl last year, but whether it's a Citrus Bowl, whether it's an Outback Bowl like kind of thing where you're going to Florida and playing one of those traditional Big Ten SEC games. I think I think if they get less than that, there's some concern. Could they end up in the New Year's Six? I could see it. I only have them losing 3 games. I think they could be pretty good. Again, that's assuming they stay healthy and a lot of things go their way. But I think they have a chance to be decent. But yeah, I think when you're looking at the Final Four basically in the tournament and being able to have a legitimate chance to beat Ohio State and win the division and be able to play a team that's not as good as you for a conference championship. I think that's going to happen when Alar or Veyer, whoever's going to be the future quarterback, is going to be there, because you're right. I mean, this year it's the development year for those guys. It's a development year for Singleton and Allen. They have some receivers they like that aren't probably ready. They have some defensive players coming up who are going to be here for a while, who I think are going to be, tremendous additions. But this year, it's going to have to be veterans who haven't done it doing it. Not that they don't have the talent to do it, not that they don't have the ability, but they just haven't done it. So it's going to be at the year that they're going to have to put it together to be able to get to that level. And that's a lot to ask, to go from a 4-5 team in the conference to one that can compete for a national championship the next year. I think that's unfair. But if you're telling me, yeah, they can make a New Year's Six game, I think I can see that path. But I think the realistic aspect here is can they stay healthy? Can they all take the necessary steps forward to in their own games, to especially Clifford, to lead them to that level? I don't know. I think Citrus Bowl, I think, would be I would not be embarrassed if I'm a Penn State fan and they went to the Citrus Bowl. I think that's a decent landing spot.
Yeah, and if you end up 9-3, that's about the right neighborhood. Last thing before I let you go, I wanted to ask about the future of Beaver Stadium, because I was reading this spring and former AD Sandy Barber was looking at options for the stadium, and then she just retired. And then now Patrick Kraft is just now taking over as the new AD on July 1st. They were looking at major renovation, theoretically at least maybe replacing it. I mean, is there any sense for what they're leaning towards doing with the stadium and what the timeline is that might happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it all kind of gets thrown up in the air when Sandy Barber retires, because that was her kind of pet project, and it was a pet project for way down the road. It was not they're doing a lot of renovations around campus, and these are renovations that Bill O'Brien was saying, hey, we really need to add this stuff. It's a lot of the weight rooms, and they're redoing the football facility now. It's gonna be great, but that's what they're really focused on. And when it gets down to it, I mean, I think you're 10 years away from even seriously considering what to do with the future of Beaver Stadium. And I think that was the timeline anyway. But yeah, I my gut feeling when I heard, because they did mention both the renovation and the complete replacement. And when you hear complete replacement at Penn State, the one thing they have is room to do a new stadium. They have a lot of cow pastures that could be used here for a new football stadium. But I think they always were thinking a renovation where you're putting in better seats, where you're putting in maybe reducing the number of fans who can get in, but making the experience a little better, where you could charge some more, redoing some luxury boxes, press box, which badly needs it, but things like that. But I don't see them replacing the Beaver Stadium. It's not. I don't think it's structurally unsound or anything like that. So it just the cost of replacing a stadium these days, especially in the economy now, is astronomical. And the other thing is with that, they need funding. They don't have the major funding for the football program at Penn State. They've got it for hockey. They don't have it for football, where you got the guy coming in with $50 million is going to say, here, get started on that. It's not there, and they desperately want it. They're hoping they can get it. Franklin has been begging for it, and it hasn't really been something that's come in yet. So I think they're going to have to settle that a little bit. And 10 years down the road, that's going to be a lot easier than it is now. Franklin's going to be a lot more. I hate, strange to say this, he'll be a lot more established as head coach if he plays out this contract that he signed last year. He'll be the guy. Maybe they'll have won something by then that the fans consider tangible. So I think he's going to have to win something before he gets that kind of money. And I think that going forward, that's something that's going to be on the table, the complete rebuild of the stadium in a different location. But I don't think I'll be alive to see that. I think this is going to be a project that the current Beaver Stadium is redone in a way where you might have 90,000 fans, 85,000 fans, but a much different look to it inside.
Well, the most important part of that whole description was, looks like I get a few more chances to visit and bump my head on the beams in the press box. Can't wait. Always a highlight of every trip to Beaver Stadium. Yes. Donnie, let people know where they can find you on Twitter and where they can read your work covering Nittany Lions.
Yeah, you can the Times-Tribune.com is the newspaper's website. A lot of stuff there. We have a Penn State blog that is pretty well read, and it gets down to it breaks down a lot of the issues behind the scenes. It breaks down games. We're going to start a podcast in the fall, which should be fun. I'll tweet out the link for that when it happens. But the Twitter account is where most people go. It's at Penn State TT for Twitter followers. So yeah, we're getting close to the start of the season, so it'll be fun. A lot of action coming there. Hopefully, get some new readers.
And Donnie is a good follow on Twitter, even though he does tweet supportively of the Yankees sometimes. I overlook that. It's okay. It's all right. We can overlook that because you're a good follow otherwise. So
you would think.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. So thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it. Always good to get some good insight into Penn State. That's always one of the big games on the Ohio State schedule every year. And we will be making that trip to Beaver Stadium and Halloween weekend this year. So that'll be a fun trip. Always a fun visit. Sometimes every once in a while you even get to stay a little closer than Altoona or something, and then it's a really fun trip. But we'll see where we end up staying this fall. But thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.